Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, and today we are going to be reviewing a hand that I played in a recent World Poker Tour event. This was a $3,500 buy-in event. We are very early in the day. As you can see, we have 30,000 chips at 5,100. I like to raise to 300 from the button, and I think this is completely standard with 6-4 suited. I am going to be opening most suited one-gappers at this point. 5-3 suited I may fold, but I'm still probably just opening it early in the day. I think there's a lot of value in being loose and aggressive, because even though this hand in particular may break even or even lose a little bit of money, it's going to allow me to get paid off way more when I actually do make a premium hand later in the day. So I'm a big fan of making speculative plays early that will give me a good image later. So flop comes 10-9-3, one spade. My opponent checks, the big blind defended. My opponent checked, and I bet 350 into the 650 pot. I think checking and betting are both fine in this scenario. The reason not to bet is because because the 10 and the 9 should connect very well with the big blind's defending range. It's always important to think about what your opponent has, not just what you have. And in this spot, my opponent's going to have a lot of middle cards, given he just defended the big blind. Of course, he could also have a lot of ace highs and unpaired hands, like king 7, that I don't mind folding. So for that reason, I think betting's fine. Also, one real benefit of betting here is that I have a backdoor flush draw, which is going to allow me to continue barreling on a lot of turns. Primarily spades. An offsuit 5 is also good enough because I turn some equity. So I like betting here. This seems pretty nice, and I don't think we need to bet too big because we're just trying to get ace high, king high, queen highs to fold. So turns a 5 of diamonds, which, I just said I'm going to bet the offsuit 5s, but here we have the 5 of diamonds. Should I continue barreling here? Well, I think it's somewhat likely that my opponent has a pair. So if he has a pair, is he ever going to fold? I would venture to say he's probably not going to fold any pair on the turn, besides maybe a 3. And some of those 3s have flush draws. So any 3 of the flush draw is also not going to fold. Maybe I could get him to fold a hand like queen 8 that he floated the flop with, but again, that has flush draws, or it's going to have flush draws a lot of the time as well. So for that reason, I don't think I want to be betting on this turn. Also, I have some equity, right? And I would hate to bet and get check raised off of whatever equity I have if my opponent decides to overplay ace 10 offsuit or something like that. So I definitely like checking behind on the turn. The river is a 7 of clubs, so we get the straight. That's good. And my opponent leads for 800 into the 1,300 pot, which is a little bit more than half pot. So this is a spot where I think a lot of amateur players make a blunder. And I think the blunder here is raising with the intention of calling if their opponent re-raises. I think there is a tiny bit of value to be had in raising, but you have to ask yourself in this spot, if I raise, what is my opponent going to call with? And if he's only going to call with perhaps a set or better, and really you can discount a lot of the sets because your opponent's going to probably check raise with 10s, 9s, or 3s on the flop, so we're really only trying to get value from 5s or 7s. If he's only going to call with a set or better, we actually lose to a lot of that range. It's not impossible for our opponent to have a flush. A lot of players would defend the big blind with a lot of diamonds, check, call the flop, check turn, hoping that I bet the turn, and then lead the river for this bet size, trying to get called by any pair. So a flush is well within my opponent's range. Notice that Jack 8 also gets there, so that's a straight that we lose to. And 8-6 gets there as well, although 8-6 is kind of difficult for my opponent to have. If my opponent has a 10 in his value betting, I do think he's going to fold pretty much every time if I raise, so I'm not really concerned with getting value from that. If he has 10-9, maybe he calls. 10-7 maybe he calls, so maybe I get a little bit of value from 2 pairs if I raise. Notice that there are some bluffs he could be bluffing with that I do not get to put more money in the pot with. So that's kind of a reason to call, because when he does call, it's usually going to be with more strong hands. In general, on the river, you want to ask yourself, are there a lot of hands in my opponent's range that I beat that can conceivably call if I raise? And here, I really do think the only hands that will call if I raise that I beat are pocket 5s, pocket 7s, 10-9, and 10-7. I think pretty much everything else is going to make a reasonable fold. I guess 9-7 would call too, so one additional hand. So for that reason, I decided to just call. And this may look pretty nitty, but I think this is a good example of a spot where you can conserve chips when you happen to be beat early in a major tournament. And notice here, we started with 30,000 chips, and now I have 28,500. So we lost effectively chump change in a spot where we rivered a straight, which is normally a very good hand. And this is what a lot of the best players do. They figure out ways to not lose a large amount of money when many other players will almost blindly give their stacks away. So always make a point to not make the blunder of raising and then especially calling if your opponent re-raises on the river, because when that's the case, you just always have the worst hand. So how did my opponent play this hand? I think he actually played it fine. He should probably have check raised the flop. I think that would have been pretty sweet. And then he could have bet the turn when any diamond comes, because then he could have a lot of diamonds in his range. When he check raises the flop, he's representing a lot of top pairs, draws, and nut hands. Although obviously there aren't very many nut hands, only 10-9 and the sets. But if he does check raise with the draws, there are going to be a lot of cards he can barrel. Notice any king, queen, jack, 8, 7, or diamond are all relatively scary if I have a hand like ace 9, for example. So I think my opponent probably should have check raised. But given he check called, I like his turn check. Maybe he could lead the turn. This is a turn that is certainly bad for my range. And then the river, I do think he should bet. I think he should probably bet a little bit bigger on the river, trying to get a bit more value out of 10s and 9s. But if he does think that my marginal made hands will fold to a bigger bet, well, then he should probably bet smaller like he did. So pretty well played hand by my opponent, and I'm just glad I didn't lose more money. It's always nice whenever you take the cautious line and it pays off. That being said, a lot of players use this justification to check everything into the ground and never put money in the pot with the nuts. So be careful that you do not become the type of player who only plays big pots with exactly the nuts. There are times to play cautiously, and then there are other times to blast your stack in. And this is one of the times with a very good hand that I think we need to be cautious. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this type of hand analysis, definitely check out my poker training site, pokercoaching.com. There you can give the site a try. You can play one of the quizzes that I explain, and you can see how you do. So go check it out at pokercoaching.com. Again, thank you very much for watching. This is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. I will talk to you next week.